deeply, deeply obnoxious that the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, gets lumped in with his idiot uncle as somehow being problematic. A military hero who has done more to point out the corruption of the British media than almost anybody else in public life, being lumped in with a bloke who has been a disgrace to the family for decades is truly, truly absurd. Actually mentioning the Duke of Sussex, Harry and Meghan constitute massive, massive news stories as well, because they offered such a wonderful opportunity to many members of the media to paint them as, or to essentially drive pages and pages, hours and hours of journalism motivated almost entirely by the fact that one of the most senior members of the royal family had the audacity to fall in love with a woman of colour, something that drives a coach and horses, if you pardon the pun, through much of our establishment presumptions, him no longer being a prince. But the lens through which I want you to look at that question is this, okay? Why do you care? I'm not saying you shouldn't, quite the opposite. I care. I care a lot more than I expected to care. I care more about this than I have about any other royal story in 20 years, except the absolutely ludicrous targeting of Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan, for the sins of being... the sins of rejecting the ludicrous deals that his family has historically done with Fleet Street and being offered up as sacrificial lambs so they'd leave the rest of them alone. But I care about this, and I can't quite work out why. I think part of the reason I care is because of a slightly embarrassing belief in what you might call the contract. What you might call and this is embarrassing because it makes me sound hideously naive, in that in order to retain the pomp and privilege, the wealth and circumstance that the royal family maintains, hinges on, we are entitled to expect certain standards to be met in return. I don't often feel sorry for members of the royal family.
We're diving into a moment that shook both the royal watchers and the British media landscape, James O'Brien's powerful defence of Prince Harry. His words didn't just challenge the hypocrisy of the press, they exposed the double standards that have haunted the Sussexes for years. James O'Brien called it deeply, deeply obnoxious that Prince Harry, a decorated veteran, humanitarian and outspoken critic of corruption, is being lumped in with his idiot uncle, Prince Andrew. And honestly, he's right. Because the contrast between how the two men are treated by the media couldn't be more striking. Let's break this down clearly. Prince Harry served his country on the front lines of Afghanistan, not once, but twice. He was on active duty, facing real danger, putting his life on the line for his nation. He didn't hide behind palace walls or use his royal status to avoid service. He flew Apache helicopters in combat zones. He was Captain Wales, a soldier first, a prince second. That's the kind of courage and commitment that should be celebrated, not scrutinized. And his service didn't end when he left the military. Harry founded the Invictus Games, an international sporting event for wounded, injured and sick servicemen and women. He spent years championing mental health awareness, breaking down stigmas that have silenced generations of people suffering in silence. He's worked with veterans, with young people, with communities that needed someone to believe in them. This is a man who has dedicated his adult life to service, real, meaningful, impactful service. Now, contrast that with Prince Andrew. Andrew has spent years trying to hide from accountability after associations that brought global disgrace to the monarchy. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal didn't just embarrass the royal family, it damaged Britain's reputation worldwide. That disastrous BBC interview where Andrew claimed he couldn't sweat and remembered being at Pizza Express became a punchline. But the underlying issues were deadly serious. Yet somehow the headlines show more fury toward Harry for falling in love than toward Andrew for failing his duty, for failing basic human decency. Think about that for a moment. One prince serves his country with honour, creates platforms for healing and empowerment, and fights for transparency. The other becomes entangled in scandal, refuses to cooperate fully with authorities, and eventually has to be stripped of his military titles and royal patronages. Yet which one gets more negative press coverage? Which one is painted as the villain? Which one is constantly attacked for every decision he makes? O'Brien's frustration speaks for millions. "It's truly absurd," he said, "that Harry gets lumped in with a bloke who's been a disgrace to the family for decades." That absurdity reveals everything about how the British press operates, who they protect, and who they persecute. It shows us the unwritten rules, the invisible lines that determine who deserves protection and who becomes the sacrifice. For years, the British tabloids protected Andrew. They soft-pedalled his mistakes. They gave him the benefit of the doubt. They ran interference. But Harry? Harry got no such courtesy. Why? Because Harry committed the ultimate sin in their eyes. He chose love over duty. He chose his family's well-being over their comfort. He chose truth over tradition. When Harry fell in love with Meghan Markle, a biracial American woman, the tabloids didn't just report on it, they weaponized it. Overnight, she became their favourite target. Every story, every headline was loaded with venom. They analysed her clothes, her gestures, her family, her past, her friends, her breathing. Nothing was off limits. Nothing was sacred. She was too loud, too ambitious, too American. They criticised her for holding her baby bump. They attacked her for the way she closed a car door. They turned eating avocados into a moral failing. They complained about her nail polish. They even criticised her for the exact same things they had praised Kate for doing. The same media that celebrated Kate's family as middle-class entrepreneurs called Meghan's family crime-ridden and embarrassing. But what they really meant was too different. A woman of colour marrying into centuries of royal whiteness broke their unspoken rule. She represented change, diversity, modernity, everything that threatens the old guard. She was educated, accomplished, financially independent before she ever met Harry. She had her own career, her own voice, her own identity, and that terrified them. The press didn't just dislike Meghan, they needed her to fail, because her success would have meant progress, and progress threatens the system that keeps them powerful. If Meghan succeeded, if she thrived, if she showed that the monarchy could evolve and embrace diversity, then what excuse would there be for the old ways? What justification for the hierarchy, the exclusion, the gatekeeping? So they built a narrative. The angry duchess, the manipulative wife, the controlling woman who took Harry away. They painted her as a gold digger, despite the fact that she had her own successful career. They called her a diva for asking staff to come to work early, while ignoring reports of other royals throwing tantrums. They accused her of making Kate cry over flower girl dresses, and when it turned out the opposite had happened, the correction was buried on page 50. But the truth? Harry left because the palace refused to protect them. He said it himself in interviews, in his book, in legal documents. They asked for help. They asked for protection from the racist attacks. They asked for support, and they were denied. They were told to endure it, to ignore it, to keep quiet. They were told that this was just part of the job, that everyone gets negative press, that complaining would only make it worse. But this wasn't normal negative press. This was coordinated harassment. This was racist dog whistling. This was incitement. And when Meghan spoke openly about having suicidal thoughts, about how dark things became, the institution's response was essentially, "We can't help you because it wouldn't look good for us." What would you do if you were watching the person you love being torn apart daily, their mental health deteriorating, while the people who could stop it chose not to? If you saw your pregnant wife being attacked with racial undertones and explicit hatred, and your own family refused to defend her? Harry did what any decent person would do. He chose his wife and child over an institution that prioritized its image over their safety. And when he stood up to the press, sued them for hacking, exposing private messages, and inventing stories the same newspapers labeled him ungrateful. Imagine that. A man who simply demanded fairness being called a traitor. A man who wanted accountability for illegal activities being painted as the problem rather than the criminals themselves. O'Brien said it best. Harry has done more to point out the corruption of the British media than almost anyone else in public life. That's why they hate him. Because he's shining a light on their darkest secrets, the illegal phone hacking, the backroom deals with courtiers, the smear campaigns that make headlines but destroy lives. The phone hacking scandal wasn't just about celebrities' voicemails. It was about ordinary people, crime victims, families of soldiers killed in action, regular citizens having their privacy violated for profit. It was about journalists bribing police officers. It was about newspapers destroying evidence. It was about a media culture so toxic, so corrupt, that it believed itself above the law. And when most people settled quietly, took the money and moved on, Harry refused. He's taken them to court. He's testified. He's exposed their methods. He's shown the public exactly how these operations work, the coordination between different papers, the deals with palace insiders, the way stories are planted and manufactured. That's why they're so vicious toward him. Not because he left the royal family, not because he married Meghan, but because he's threatening their power, their profits, their entire business model. If Harry wins his legal battles, if he exposes the full extent of their corruption, it could reshape British journalism forever. And yet, through it all, Harry and Meghan haven't lost their humanity. They've built a new life, one defined not by royal protocol, but by purpose. From Archewell to Invictus, they've shown that compassion and integrity can exist outside the palace walls. Look at what they've actually done since leaving. They've signed deals with Netflix and Spotify, yes, but they're creating content that matters. Documentaries about mental health, about the Invictus Games, about important social issues. They've launched Archewell, their foundation focused on compassionate leadership and community service. They've continued Harry's work with veterans. They've supported women's rights, racial justice, environmental causes. They're raising their children, Archie and Lilibet, with privacy and normalcy, something Harry never had. They're building a life where their kids can go to school, play in the park, have birthday parties without photographers hiding in the bushes. They're creating the childhood Harry always wished he'd had. This isn't rebellion, it's evolution. They're rewriting what modern royalty can be: accountable, independent and free. And as O'Brien reminded the world, the problem isn't Harry or Meghan. The problem is a media culture that punishes authenticity and rewards obedience. Think about it. When royals follow the script, smile and wave, never complain, never explain, they're celebrated. But the moment someone says, "This isn't healthy," or "This isn't right," or "I deserve to be treated like a human being," they're attacked. The message is clear. Shut up, play your role, and be grateful for your gilded cage. When Harry and Meghan refuse to play that game, the tabloids panic. Because without their villains, they lose their story. They need Harry and Meghan to be the bad guys. They need to manufacture outrage about them. Because every article about the Sussexes gets clicks, sells papers, generates revenue. The hate is profitable. The drama is their business model. But the truth always wins eventually, and people like James O'Brien make sure of that. O'Brien isn't alone. There are journalists, commentators, and ordinary people who see through the smokescreen, who recognize the double standards, who understand what's really happening here. So if you believe in fairness, in decency, in the right to love freely without persecution, then stand with them. Support the Sussexes. Support honest journalism. Because, as we say here on Meghan and Harry Tales, truth-tellers like Harry are fighting not just for themselves, but for all of us. This is about more than one couple. It's about whether we accept a media culture that destroys people for profit. It's about whether we tolerate racism disguised as royal reporting. It's about whether we believe people have the right to protect their mental health, their children, their basic humanity. Harry and Meghan's story isn't over. It's just beginning. And we'll be here every step of the way, cutting through the noise, calling out the hypocrisy, and celebrating two people who chose love, chose truth, and chose themselves. That's not a scandal. That's courage.